Hello, everyone, and welcome to our September workshop, Updating Your Fundraising Plan, Strategies for the New COVID Landscape. I'm Angela Beard, and I know quite a few of you out there in internet land, so welcome. A little bit about Sanford before we go on and meet our speaker and listen to all her fabulous wisdom. Sanford we are an institute that exists to support the nonprofit sector by providing low-cost and free fundraising training. Our mission, you can see online in front of you, is to help nonprofits significantly increase their fundraising capabilities and the impact they have on their communities through proven contemporary curriculum provided by world-class nonprofit leaders, one of which we have today, best-in-class faculty, and renowned philanthropists. Just a little bit more about me. I'm the director of the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, and I have a fundraising background myself, quite a long one. And I've also been teaching for about 7 years now. So I get to combine those two and, take the education where it's needed to all of our regional nonprofits in Washington State. So we do that through a monthly workshop. I get on the road when the road has opportunities, which are less these days, but I do cover the whole state of Washington. So if I could help you somehow working with your board or with your staff or whatever, please let me know. I've published, I have a couple of degrees that were very expensive, but never mind that. They helped me get to where I am today, and that is here to introduce our fabulous guest speaker, Linda Akey, who is going to talk to us today about planning. Linda has been involved in nonprofit organizations since childhood. In 2008, she started Competent Assistant for Nonprofits, CANDO. We like that, right? Can-do attitude, to help new nonprofit organizations get started and complete their state and IRS filings. Linda also co-founded the Northern Colorado Nonprofit Resource Center, providing services and resources to over 3,000 nonprofits. Linda serves as staff member, volunteer, and board member in many nonprofits over the years and holds degrees in sociology and public administration. Her passion is helping nonprofits to realize their passion. So without further ado, I will just turn it right over to Linda. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Angela. I really appreciate the invite to come here and to speak with everybody. I am just thrilled to be able to share some of the information today, and what I'm hoping is that you'll find hope in this fundraising, as we have had to make so many changes with everything. What I'd like to go ahead and do right now is just share my presentation, so give me 1 second here and I'll get it up on the screen for you. Okay. So I wanted to just address some of the objectives that we're going to be going through today. We're going to cover kind of basically the components of the plan and what we've all known as our strategic plans. And this is going to kind of inform us for where we're going to go from there. When and how much we revise this plan, and the considerations that we have when we're going through revisions. We should all be revising our plans on a regular basis, but we really need to figure out, those revisions that we're going to be doing. How to restart your plan, determining the funding options, and creating some new fundraising ideas in this COVID world. So before I move on, what I'd like to know next is, I have a poll question for you, I believe. So if you want to do that poll real quick, we'll put that up. Do you already have a strategic fundraising plan? Yes or no? All right. So that helps me. So a lot of nonprofit organizations don't have those plans yet. And I think it's really important that, that we understand kind of what the basics are for getting that plan. And I think a lot of nonprofits now in the COVID era really do need to be looking at all of the strategies they need to have. So please embrace the change that is going through in the world. Like I said, I want this to be a hopeful presentation. There's been a lot of really great research that's come out recently that I'm going to cover on what's happening in this COVID era and what's impacting us. But the secret of change is to focus all of our energy, not on fighting the old, but on building our new. And so let's create new plans, and let's take existing plans for our fundraising to another level and really be much more thoughtful about what's inside of our plans and what we're really actually doing. So yes, COVID happens, but there's some really great studies that have come out. I've got the CCS fundraising study that came out that talks about how it's impacting nonprofit organizations, and also Fidelity Charitable Foundation also put out a really great one about what donors are doing and how those are set up. So these resources are at the end of my slideshow. So you'll have those links available to you. But what I wanted to touch on is that in the early piece, like back in April, we were seeing a lot of cancellations of Facebook and in-person events. But we started to see, as time was going by, an increase in funding by individual donors, and that's showing in the research. What also is showing in the research is that there have been little change or increases in foundation support. So writing those grants is a good idea. Keeping and establishing foundation relationships is really important right now, because that's going to be one of our great sources of funding at this time. Increases in donations to help those impacted directly by COVID has been occurring, but that has also been to the detriment of other organizations. And it's happened in the past where arts organizations are one of the ones, or sometimes international organizations end up not getting as much of that funding when we have a crisis that's occurring that needs its immediate attention. We have seen a decrease in volunteerism, so volunteers are concerned about actually going to places to do volunteerism, but so are nonprofits. Nonprofits have been like, I'm not sure we want all these volunteers around. And some of that also is due to changes in their programming and how they're delivering those programs. So we have seen that decrease in volunteerism on both the side of the volunteers and the nonprofits. Significant impacts to nonprofits in fundraising, programming, and volunteerism. And nonprofits believe they will get less support. But the truth is, so initially there was a drop in support in the early months of COVID, but we are seeing in the data of the research that those nonprofits are starting to see increases by individual donors to their nonprofit organizations. And especially as those nonprofits start to ramp up their online events or their other kind of fundraising activities. So the good news is despite COVID happening, we can still fundraise. And I think it was really scary at first and we had to wrap our heads around what was happening, but we're actually seeing a lot of positive things. So this is where I want to give you the hope that having this fundraising strategic plan is beneficial to you and is really going to help. Oh, one other piece, corporate funding cutbacks. We are seeing more of those. Corporations are kind of bottling up a little bit, and so we are seeing funding cutbacks there. So what we want to do is we want to prepare for a new plan. And a lot of times organizations are kind of flying by the seat of their pants on their fundraisers, and they just, let's do this fundraiser next month, or, let's plan for our signature event. Versus really getting strategic about how they're going to do every piece of their diversified fundraising. So we're going to talk more about that, and we want to be as prepared as we possibly can. This preparedness also helps us when we run into these disasters like this. This is not the first time that we're going to have these challenges. Other kinds of natural events can happen, and we just need to be prepared for what is going to come down the pike, and our strategic plans need to be versatile enough that we can prepare for these different funding strategies that we need to be making so that we can make some more money. So where do we start and what's in the plan? And I just wanted to go through like the typical fundraising plan. So for the majority of you that are on this call, you're probably not as familiar with putting together these plans. So these are the main components, and this is really important for every aspect of your plan, just to be able to follow the process through. And we'll get to that again. So the first thing that you're going to do is an analysis of your organization. Where are you starting your organization and what are your assets? And I'm going to list out for you what a whole bunch of different kind of assets for the organization are. where are you going and what goals does the organization really have? So once you have all of your analysis together and you've got your mission statement and your vision statement that's really guiding everything you're doing, you're setting up those goals for what it is you want to accomplish. A lot of organizations are having to change their goals, and this is why we need to be changing our plans. So we need to reset those goals for us to be successful. And we need to reset our objectives. So the way that we were doing fundraisers in the past is not the way we're doing fundraisers today. And the kinds of activities that we're doing to accomplish our goals have had to change dramatically. So we need to redo our objectives and redo what it is that we're going to be doing to be able to reach that success. And whether those goal numbers, depending on what our programming changes are, those goal numbers may go ahead and change. So we need to be reflective about what are we doing? Are we increasing our goals or decreasing our goals based upon whether or not our programs are changing up or down? Like we need to do more programming or different programming. We've got to cancel programming. And what objectives are we going to do when we are doing the fundraising activities to meet those program goals? What activities worked, what will work, and what do we stop doing? These strategies are really important. So we just need to think about what are we really going to be doing for fundraising now? And it's changed, and we need to be much more reflective about what it is that we're going to do. What will all this cost? So we always have a budget to everything, right? And how will we write it down? I'm going to give some information on the document itself, as well as some of the charting activities that you should be doing as well. And evaluating, how will we know the plan works? And now revising. This is the stage that a lot of nonprofits are at right now. So for those of you who haven't done the plan, these first pieces, the analysis and the goals, the objective strategies, etc., those are your pieces that you're going to have in every plan. But we also need to start revising plans that we have. How are we going to course correct, and what does that course correction look like? So when we are considering revising our plans, we need to figure out what is working, what is not working, when did it stop working, why did it stop, and is the plan meeting the goals and objectives? There's a really great article that I pulled some information from Universal Class that has some great information on revising and starting your plan. And that is also in the resources that we have today. So what is working and what we're doing, we need to figure out, like, how are we going to make these changes? And if it's working, we may not need to revise the plan. Did it stop working ahead of COVID, or did it start after COVID, or like way after COVID? Like, what was it, when was it that this was happening where our plan started to not work for us anymore? And how do we know that we're meeting the goals and objectives? Did we set up the tracking for our goals and objectives to make sure that we knew what was going to happen? Okay, so when you're looking at revising your plan, think about whether or not the plan needs minor changes, moderate changes, or significant major changes. It needs a whole new overview. Minor changes are things like resources are still adequate to meet your fundraising needs. So you have all of your resources in place and you didn't lose those. A lot of nonprofit organizations, their staffing changed to working from home, but they were able to keep their staff. Other organizations may not have had that success. Goals are still achievable, and your objectives are still achievable, but they need to be tweaked. There's something that's still not quite right. And your impact on your fundraising goals was not significant. Maybe you had a small amount, or maybe a certain activity was going really well and isn't now. Something was working better than something else, and so you've got that little tweaking going on. So those are the minor changes where you're looking back at your strategic plan and saying, okay, these are all of the different fundraising activities that we had, and these are the changes that have occurred, and they were just minor changes, and we can move forward with just small tweaks to our fundraising plan. But there are other kinds of plans that things are starting to run off the rails. Our resources are diminishing, so we had to lose staff. We didn't have financial resources coming in. the goals of the strategic plan were starting to slip. So when you were trying to raise certain amounts of money or do certain kinds of activities, you know, you're canceling all of your events, and those goals have now slipped. Now you need new goals, whole new goals, right? Many of us were experiencing such dramatic change in, oh my gosh, I can't do this event anymore. Others were trying to come up with new events to be able to do. That completely alters your fundraising strategic plan. And so now you need to think of something new. Objectives are not being met. Timelines are shifted. Funding success is lower now. You're not getting the funds that you needed. So these are the moderate changes that really require a new strategic plan to be developed. Some organizations have experienced major changes. So those major changes are leadership changes, internal reorganization, mission changes. You may not be experiencing a mission change, but there's a lot of organizations that are experiencing significant program changes. And those program changes means that you need to have new fundraising goals and objectives. Major impacts to funding success. Resources have dramatically changed. Expenses and income are blown out. Economic changes. Internally and externally, natural disasters. We talk about economic changes in terms of recessions, depressions that are happening in the economy and how they're impacting us. And essentially, did I mention COVID happens? It really does. And this is just an example where it doesn't matter what the disaster is that is occurring, we have to be prepared for those disasters. But when we're not, we need to also be responsive and start to really plan for what the future is going to look like. And if we do that preparedness and we have a good solid plan, we'll be able to just tweak it in the future, hopefully. So what are some of the questions that you want to ask yourself about whether or not you need to make minor, major, or moderate changes to your plan? So has the organization taken on new responsibilities? Have existing responsibilities changed? Has the environment or organization culture changed? So a lot of organizations are, like I mentioned, moving away from offices. They're actually leaving their locations and moving more towards virtual offices where their staff and their volunteers are working from home. And this changes the culture within an organization and really alters how you're doing your fundraising and how you're working together. Should individual goals and objectives be increased or decreased? We've talked about that. There's also legislative impacts. There's a lot of changes that have happened with COVID. One of the more exciting ones for nonprofits was they were included in the CARES Act, and that was brand new. And we're actually looking forward to that continuing to increase. The other change that was made was for charitable donations. As many people know, most people couldn't get a tax deduction after the 2017 tax law for their charitable donations. But in the CARES Act, they're allowing for a $300 tax deduction regardless of your tax status. So that's really exciting, and they are trying to see if they can increase that. I've heard some numbers thrown around of thousands of dollars that will be eligible for any donor, regardless of if you itemize or get charitable deduction. So these legislative impacts can influence the fundraising strategies that you're going to have and the kinds of grants that you can write for in the future. Are there any organizations doing similar work? We are seeing, I'm seeing, because I work primarily with new nonprofit organizations, I'm seeing an increase in the state of Washington of about 10 to 15% of new nonprofits registering every month. So we need to be aware of these new nonprofits and what is happening in our landscape to make sure that we're collaborating with those and we're responsive, because they're going to try and seek that funding as well. Okay, so we're going to create the plan, and you need to be able to get everybody together. We've talked about this in strategic plans before, but make sure that you have your team together. And this team could include your donors, other stakeholders. There are many different people that can be involved in the development of your fundraising strategic plan. Some organizations use foundation heads to participate on their team. So different key stakeholders that you want to be able to gather together. Identify the assets and strengths. We talked about that a little bit, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail just in a bit here. Brainstorm and prioritize. So this is where we're going to start to really pull together all sorts of ideas about what we need to do and prioritize what that is. So moving from, oh my gosh, this is terrible and we have to cancel all of our events, to what can we do and how does this look for our future? Evaluate all those funding strategies, setting those goals and objectives. And it's really important that this plan be written down. And the other thing that I always say, I don't care if it's a strategic plan or a fundraising plan, which it should be just a part of your strategic plan. And by the way, you may have to redo your entire strategic plan in addition to just your fundraising strategic plan. Because if the fundraising strategic plan is changing, that means your programs are changing, and you need to be able to get with programming to figure out how that's going to work. There's also operational changes that could be occurring, and that can impact the fundraising strategic plan. So it's really important that you're working with everybody to make sure that this fundraising strategic plan is going to meet whatever new plan needs to be put together for the entire organization. So that's really important when you're putting this fundraising strategic plan together. Write it down and follow it. I tell my board of directors every time, you have to have your fundraising strategic plan or your strategic plan with you at every single meeting and make sure that the goals and objectives are being met. And staff needs to be responsive to say, this is what we did this month, this is how it went, this is what the quarter went. You need to be able to follow and track that. And the only way you can do that is to write this plan down. So you need to have a hard copy of it, and everybody needs to have it in their hands. All right, so the first thing that we're doing when we're putting this plan together is we're honestly going through an analysis of the organization. And we have to do this from the perspective of COVID now. These changes that have occurred have impacted our organizations in ways we could have never imagined. Everything stopped, the economy stopped. But this is the perfect time for us to be able to reevaluate what is happening within our organizations. There are several tools and resources that you can use to be able to do this analysis. The PESTLE is for outside our organization, external to our organization. In terms of the environment, I'm going to put this slide up that'll go through every piece of PESTLE. We want to do a competitive analysis. We really want to know who is out there. And I encourage you to pull up some of the information with the Washington Secretary of State. You can pull up the new nonprofits that have registered with the state in the last 6 months. Market. So you really need to take a look at the market and market impacts and do a market study. And I know that takes a little bit more time, but it is important to know how COVID has impacted the community and the community that you serve so that you can be responsive to that community. And in your fundraising, it's really important because you need to know exactly where your donors are at. I was kind of surprised by some of the data that came forth in the study, particularly about slow increases in individual donation giving. And so I think that we really need to take a look at what that market is from our donor perspective. Collaborating and how we can get together and collaborate with other organizations. I think a lot of this is changing too in a time of COVID. We really need to do even more collaborations and be more strategic. And this may be an opportunity to explore new collaborations, reconnect with old collaborators, or even, you know, there may be organizations, we're starting to see some decreases in organizations. You know, you may not have a collaborator anymore. So you really need to revisit this. A SWOT, so we'll go through that. And goals and objectives that are evaluated and that you've gone through each of your existing goals and objectives to review that. Angela, can you share with me your question that you had?
Sure. I was asking about goals, sort of from earlier in the presentation. And in my work with helping people, I do come across lots of nonprofits that don't have a strategic plan. And you correctly were identifying that as a way that we want to orient our replanning. But I wondered what you would say to those nonprofits who are usually small and, you know, scrappy, that don't have a strategic plan when they're starting to review their fundraising plan.
Yeah, so it is always a good idea to have a full strategic plan for the entire organization. Um, it's important, if you don't have a strategic plan, that you are working with, and usually the people, when you're a small organization like that, oftentimes the executive director is the development director, but you need to know what your programs are and your administration is. You need to know what those expenses are for your administrative and programming expenses. And I always, whenever I'm doing a budget, I always start with the expenses first, so that I know how much needs to be raised in order to fund that. So you really need to know what those are. And if you're changing those programs around, then you need to have that in consideration. You need to know what the budget is for the whole organization so you can set your fundraising goals. And I think we had another question that was in the chat. I can't see it, so.
Yeah, I can read it to you if you'd like. An audience member asks, our organization is starting a year-long strategic planning process. We can't wait through fundraising plans. Any suggestions on doing an initial interim fundraising plan?
Yeah, so it's really tough when we're in this urgent emergency situation. So I think that it's really important to sit back down and just review, as I mentioned, what those expenses are, what has changed, and how you can reset the different kind of fundraising strategies that you have. And you can do this a little bit faster through the process. You know, you can take some of this stuff I can do in, you know, 2 4-hour meetings with clients sometimes, of really just kind of quickly going through everything that the organization has in place and what changes are being made, and really understanding those different changes. So yeah, it's kind of tough in this climate that we're in, but I will also say that if you can take the time to set yourself up for 2021, that you move forward with that. And I'm not saying that you suspend all fundraising for now, but that you really start to make a strategic plan for 2021 and be as thoughtful about it as you can. A lot of times, you know, you're spending a full year putting together a strategic plan, and we don't have that kind of time right now, which is why a lot of organizations have kind of been going on the fly to get new fundraising activities done. So I do understand that this is a challenge, but I think if you can review your existing programs and operations, see what those expenses are, and understand that piece of the budget and what changes have occurred, that can help to inform you about how much money you need to raise and the kinds of activities you need to do. And in some cases, you may not need to make major changes. Like I said, you may only need to make some minor changes, but I would also be trying to work on a fundraising strategic plan for 2021. Okay, so I'm going to move on, but please, you can put your questions in the chat or hold them to the end, and we will try and get to them as much as possible. I believe that this is an hour. Is that correct?
Yes, an hour.
Okay, so let me continue to move on. Examples of assets. So when we're looking at our organization, we want to evaluate what assets we have in place. The programs we have in place are an asset. Our staff, our board of directors, you know, do we have a good board that's working together? And you may or may not have these different things. It's not an asset if you have a dysfunctional board, right? Or a dysfunctional staff. But it is an asset if your programs are working really well, or you've got a strong volunteer base. That's an asset for your organization. If your organizational structure is really set up for a pandemic, you know, like you were already doing Zoom conferencing. or that you've got a strong funding base. So these are different kinds of pieces that could be a part of your asset plan. Not everybody will have each of these, and there may be other things that come to mind, but these are some ideas of different assets. I talked before about PESTEL. So this is an external analysis of your organization that goes over the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal aspects of what is happening outside of the organization. You can do this internally as well. You can look internally, but we have some additional tools that can be used for internal. So this is one way that you can analyze your organization. And it's something that's been out there for a long time, so it's pretty easy to implement. The SWOT, of course, so this really looks internally at your organization, at what your strengths and your weaknesses and opportunities and threats are. And someone was asking earlier about, like, if we don't have a strategic plan or we're redoing ours, how can we do this? So you can take a look quickly at your organization using a SWOT to figure out, like, okay, where are we at right now, now that this has happened, and what do we need to be able to change, and what can we leverage for our organization to be successful? So this is a really quick tool that a lot of organizations have been able to use on any of your planning pieces. When we're looking at SWOT on a fundraising strategic plan, we really want to concentrate on just that, on just your fundraising strategic plan and how that's impacting. So you can use this, in a much larger strategic plan, but we wanted to look at it specifically to fundraising activities that we're doing. And when we're doing our goals and objectives, I mentioned the goals and objectives. SMART is probably your best way to move forward with that, because we want to make sure that we are evaluating all of our goals and objectives, and that we're using a tool like SMART to be able to say, yes, we met our goals, or no, we didn't. And now we're going to create new goals and objectives that are going to meet what we set out to do. So when we reset goals and objectives, we might be making small changes to those goals, or moderate changes, or major changes. And we need to really be thoughtful about what it is that we're doing. Are we totally getting rid of a fundraising event and never doing it again? Are we going to bring that back? And when you set up your objectives, how are we going to bring that back if we canceled it this year? And what is that going to look like for the future? I think a lot of the activities that we had done in the past are going to change in many different ways. And we may have found some other things that are successful. So we need to figure out if these are major changes or moderate changes that we're making to each of our goals and objectives that we have. So which fundraising activities are working, what is not working, how are we going to change it, and what is that going to look like? I wanted to throw in a few ideas for you to consider when you're thinking about your activities. So this will go into detail about some activities. And transactional activities are those things where somebody gets something for something. It's very, very clear cut. So things like Girl Scout cookies and candy bars and silent auctions and walks and runs. And they're getting something back for giving you something, right? But not as much buying into the whole concept of your nonprofit. And we really want to establish these relationships. And I think this is a perfect time for nonprofits to really, really tell their story. So it's great to have transactional activities. That's fine. Do your silent auctions all day long. I think it's great. And at the same time, you want to establish relationships. And so the transformative activities that you want to be working on, and the studies are showing this. Phone calling is your #1 thing. So be making those phone calls to all your donors and consider new donors. Hold Zoom calls with individuals or small groups of people that might be similar to really start to have those direct appeals. Have your board of directors do Zoom calls with individuals. These direct appeals are actually where we're seeing, and in the past, we've seen it as well. But I think a lot of times nonprofits get away from the actual door knocking, the actual phone calling to say, hey, we're here. Monthly giving, if you don't have a monthly giving plan, it's a great time to set it up. Sponsorships of people or animals, this is where people buy into the concept that you are doing. So sponsorships of like a homeless organization may have sponsor this number of homeless people, or sponsor these number of meals, or sponsor this dog to be able to get adopted. Major gifts, matching gifts. This is a good time to start making your reach outs to corporations. I said that corporation giving is down. That doesn't mean relationships with corporations needs to be down. This is a time where they can start to plan for 2021, when hopefully this virus will not be impacting the businesses as much. Advisory board, creating an advisory board of your donors and your volunteers and others that are stakeholders into the organization can really help your fundraising activity. And these advisory boards can be giving more information or doing activities centered around your analysis, or thoughts and ideas about the kinds of activities that you should and could be doing in the future. Donor thank yous, don't forget, always do those, but this might be a really good time. And one thing that I've heard a lot of nonprofits are doing is just a touch-in to talk to people and see how they're doing, talk to their donors, not asking for any money, but really establishing those relationships, just like, how are you doing? And we care about you too. And setting up Zoom events where you have everybody together just to share. This is such a difficult time for everybody. And if you can be that resource to people just to be able to touch base, it keeps your nonprofit top of mind. Grant writing and foundation relationships. As I mentioned, foundations have already set the monies that they are giving out for 2020, and they already had their monies established for 2021. So we're not seeing decreases. In many cases, we're seeing increases in foundation support, and we expect that to continue. So what that means is we need to really be out there getting relationships with the foundations. All right, so you've probably all been thinking about these different activities that you're doing. I thought I would throw out a few other ideas. One of the sources of this is a marketing company called Whole Whale. They specialize in nonprofit marketing. You can look them up on YouTube. They've got some really great YouTubes out there, so I would suggest them. But phone calls, handwritten notes, annual letters, taking things online, these virtual movie nights or poker nights or game nights, karaoke's, the game nights, virtual game, they have all sorts of apps that have games that you can do online, and you can start to figure out ways to monetize things. Online merchandise sales, roundup. So this is when people buy things, it rounds up and it's a donation to your organization. There are some apps that do that. Live stream gaming, Tiltify is an example of that. Live stream giving through events like Facebook and YouTube. There's some great things that are out there about how to create a really fun, exciting event on Facebook or YouTube. And peer-to-peer sales, all sorts of places with all sorts of ideas on doing peer-to-peer sales. Have your donors put together Zoom cocktail hours or virtual challenges that go viral, social distance events where you get people promoting your organization. So these are just some ideas that you might want to consider in this time of COVID for changes. And some of these changes may be things that you end up doing permanently for the future. Some of them might not be. Some of them could be adjustments to existing fundraisers that you have. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to redo our case statement. This is your needs statement. Why do you need to exist? And so you can use your revised analysis that you've done to be able to establish it. You want new data that has come in. There is new data in this time of COVID that you should be in mind. For instance, we are expecting a huge increase in homelessness in 2021 and 2022 because of COVID. And that data is starting to come out, or you can also find ways for you to find this new data or do the data yourself, finding out, you know, what's going to be happening in the future here as these changes are occurring. Identify your sense of urgency in your case statement. Create a theme to connect your donors. Tout history, reputation, and credibility. Write a one-sentence case statement. And once again, I'm talking about a fundraising strategic plan, and so I'm talking about your internal case statement. The external case statement and your needs statement for the organization goes inside your strategic plan as a whole and can be cut and pasted into your grants. But this case statement also is something for you to be considering in your fundraising strategic plan, that these are the changes we're going to make. These are why. This is the data. This is what we know is going to work and why we think it's going to work. Okay, so I just want to say that you really, really need to write your plan down. A written plan will give you guidance on strategy and tactics when you are in the thick of events, mailings, and calls. So you really have to have your action plan written down, and you need to be able to track it. So write out your goals and objectives, assign a budget for each of the activities that you're going to be doing, and identify who will do what goals and objectives. You need to hold people accountable for the activities that need to be done. You also need to set up deadlines so that everybody is doing what they're going to do and who's going to do it. So I would chart that out. And develop a strategy chart that identifies each of the activities in detail as to what you're going to do. You know, whenever I do grants, I'm doing a full-on grant strategic plan, identifying all of the grants. But in general, you can take like a general look at your grants and say, okay, we're going to be applying for a dozen grants. We anticipate to get these 2 grants out of those, and this is how much money will come in. We ended up getting those grants, not getting those grants. And who's responsible for that. Events, annual letters, phone calls, just go through the whole list of all of the different activities that you're doing and track each of those activities and what happened with those. When you are evaluating your fundraising strategic plan, whether you're going to do it now, before, or like as you set up your plan, make sure that you get evaluation tools in place. Establish regular intervals of evaluating. I don't care if it is your staff or the board or the volunteers, just make sure that everybody knows that these are the goals, this is what you need to do, and we're looking back through it on a regular basis. Really be working that plan. I put this at the end because I really wanted you to understand that what we're trying to do is create a living document, not something that we just put on the shelf and it goes away, but a living document which lays out specific fundraising tasks and strategies, including who will be responsible for completing them and the timeline of when they need to be accomplished. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish in this fundraising strategic plan. I got this quote from Candid. Candid is used to be Foundation Center and GuideStar, and they've now combined into Candid. Candid has a really great workshop on creating a fundraising strategic plan that is like an hour and a half or 2 hours long. So anyway, you can check that one out as well as another resource of information. And I am including all of my resources for the organization, or for where I got a lot of the information, and others that you can tap into. Compass Point has a really great strategic plan format as well. They're really good. So I will take questions. I'm going to stop share now so I can kind of take people's questions.
There was a question in the are we both doing the same, Austin? The Q&A section, Linda, about the CARES Act, and one of our guests wants to know more details about that and the $300 deductible donations.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to qualify. I'm not an accountant or an attorney. I am a person who specializes actually in, I do tax stuff, and I do share that. So just so you know, I did get this information. I'm going to share my screen one more time here. Well, yeah, I'll share that in just a second. But here's the deal. So the CARES Act said that no matter what kind of taxpayer you are, if you itemize your taxes or do a standard deduction, if you donate, you can donate $300 this year, and 100% of it supposedly is tax deductible. Now you want them to meet with their accountant to make sure. Yeah, I will put it back up. And so you'll want to meet with your accountant to make sure of all of that. But yes, the $300, it doesn't matter like who you are. So yeah. And I am always available for a 1-hour free consult. If you go to you can either email me. My best email is CANDO50, oh, it says 510, 501c3@gmail.com. Sorry about that typo. Or linda@CANDO501c3.com. If you go to my website and you click on schedule a consult, it'll set up a 1-hour free consult with me. So if you want to do that, you're welcome to, and I'll sit and chat with you for a little bit and share.
Okay, we're running out of time. I just want to thank Linda tremendously from the bottom of our hearts for sharing this wealth of information. I don't know how y'all got it all into an hour, but thank you, Linda. Thank you so much for your expertise and willing to share it with us. Audience folks, we have ethics coming up in October. We'll be reprising our panel. So October 27th, join us for lunch, 12 to 1. You'll get more information by email. And thank you so much for being with us. Stay dry, and we'll see you in October.